So here's the plan for today. We are going to take a bit of a break from the normal, deep, personal self-reflection episodes and just do a bit of an update, talk about what the plans are for the show, and mostly just try to read and respond to everybody's comments. We really were not expecting the volume and depth of response that we got when we made the announcement and had our launch, so to speak. It was pretty overwhelming. So thanks for that. And we'd like to just, talk a little, answer some stuff, read what you guys wrote.
All right, well, let's start with this one from Igor Erohin. I'm not about ageism, but the episode didn't contain your lives' timelines. And this is in response to the very first video we did.
The hello,
I think this is
here's who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he's upset that it didn't contain our lives' timelines. He says, I think this is important when you talk about your topics as I understand them. Human possibilities, achievements, and achievability, success and effectiveness. I'm in my 30s and still aimless. This bothers me a lot. So could you give a quick timeline on...
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair question, right? Did you figure everything out when you were a teenager and then you were, good to go from there or what? Yeah, so rough timeline was I graduated high school I was one semester away from an AA degree. So I was very ahead at that point, but that didn't last long. Then I went to school, or I finished up my AA and then went to UCF for mechanical engineering. I lasted for, I think, one semester, and partway through that semester, I realized that it was awful. I hated it. And I decided, I had a couple very, what's the opposite of inspiring? They were inspiring. They inspired me to switch majors. I had some really awful classes. Anyway, I decided to audition for music because I'd played guitar for a while, really wanted to. I spent 8 months I took time off of school and I just did nothing but practice for the audition. Then I auditioned, and then I did 4 years of school as a music major. I at no point ever had a plan for what to do after that. And so I got out and I just taught for a while and then got kind of depressed that I really didn't have any direction and I was just teaching, but I knew that I didn't want to do that forever. And then at some point, I just decided that I'm going to learn software. I probably was, I don't know, 25 or so, around there, I think. Spent a couple years learning that and then slowly got that going and then started getting into freelance and then, eventually had a career.
How many years was it, or how long was it from when you first started learning all the software stuff?
Until I had a job?
Yeah, before you had a job.
Well, it was a little weird because I started with freelance. So I was teaching at the time, but I was tapering that down. And then I had this idea that if I took a freelance job, as long as the timeline wasn't too strict, I could just learn whatever I needed to learn to do it. So I would take one job, and it might have been simple, but for me, I just didn't know much at the time. So I just figured, well, if it takes me 6 months and I have the time, then I'll just stay up every night and learn and do whatever courses I have to and eventually figure out how to do the project and then deliver it. And I kind of thought of it like I was getting paid to learn how to do something. And then I did it, and then I would just take more projects and slowly build it up that way. So I found a pretty nice way of ramping up into a full-time job. That obviously doesn't always work, but that's what worked for me. So there was never a clear point of me, now I'm a software developer. It just became more and more of what I did.
Yeah.
But point is, it took me until around 30 to have this career. And then, YouTube was part of that, and, working on that project, and that was a pretty big part of my life. So there was never a point where I had it figured out at all. I still don't have it figured out. I'm happy I have a job, but it's not, I've never had this sense of, yes, this is my life's path and this is my purpose.
Right. I don't feel like that either.
Yeah.
I mean, if you explain it like, I worked really hard and then I got a job and I'm still at that job, it
Right.
kind of sounds like you figured it all out. But
Yeah, and that's not. Yeah, that's a bit of a mischaracterization of what actually happened. It was
all right,
messy.
so we also feel like we haven't figured it out.
Well, give your timeline too, real quick.
Well, I left, or when I graduated high school, I went to college for 2 years and I got my AA. Just a general AA. It wasn't specific to anything.
Yeah.
And I kind of took a few years off. I planned on going to college, but didn't.
Just why? Real quick, why?
Money,
Really?
I think. I don't know. I didn't want to. It was going to be 1 year off. I was going to take 1 year off,
Yeah.
and then that turned into a couple years.
So you procrastinated your way out of college.
I did. I actually considered going to college for art then and didn't.
I didn't know that.
Which is interesting because I wasn't really doing a lot of art then, but it was always kind of a thing that I wanted to do. But anyway, so I really didn't do much for a couple years. I was also a music teacher at the same place as you, and then I was also doing landscaping. So I did that for a few years, and then when I was, I think, 23 or 24, I decided to really get serious about learning how to draw and learning all about art. So I did that for 3 or 4 years. So when I was 27, I got my job where I'm at now, and I've been there for almost 4 years now. I'm 30 now, so yeah, that's my rough timeline. You're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it wasn't early that you even figured out that you wanted to do art.
No, not really. No, because I wanted to be a musician.
Right.
And then that dream just died.
Hmm.
But anyway, I think that sums up our timelines.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Right.
By Emily Thomas. I'd be interested to know if you think teachers are necessary to learn something. Are they necessary for some subjects or for certain types of students? Not trying to discredit teachers. I've had some amazing teachers. For some subjects, teachers actually held me back, and I've made the most progress by being self-taught.
Okay, so let's be honest here. We tried to record this episode a few days ago, and this question, it broke us. I started ranting about some horrible teacher that I had in college, and we got into this whole thing about what's wrong with education and what's good about teachers and what's bad, and we went for half an hour about this one question. So I'm not going to say anything about it other than that is an amazing question, and we are planning on doing an episode where we simply talk about that. Do you need a teacher? Do you not? How is it different for different fields and different people, and what are the pros and cons and all of that?
Because we definitely have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, we have too many thoughts, and we can't handle doing this in a shorter episode.
Right. And so that also goes with Danny Elliott's comment. As a former educator, I can tell you that people do talk, think, and write a lot about this stuff. But the problem is mostly about connecting theory with practice. Self-motivated learning is the best learning, but how do you get students to motivate themselves? Also, when do you intervene in a student's process? Is a teacher a coach or subject matter expert? Also, if coaching works, how and why does it work?
Right.
So that would be another one that we would
again, fantastic question / observation. Not something we can answer briefly or even talk about briefly. So let's just say we plan on doing an episode where we spend quite a while thinking about and talking about that, because of course that's an extremely good thing to bring up. It's easy to say what we ought to do, but how do you actually do that?
Right. So we will for sure visit those again in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Next one by VDux. I've been thinking heavily about my education. Was a biochemistry major for a year and a half. Left due to poor life decisions. Now, my life working hourly for not enough is proving to be unsatiating. My brain is back at full power, and I want to do so much but feel like I move too much from one thing to another. Have thought about risking financial well-being going back to college. A coworker mentioned going the self-taught route. I am worried about how to do that and about goals and whatnot. I had been watching your music theory videos again, starting this week, and then the video about this channel came up. Anyhow, please keep making videos on these topics. If you guys can teach ways you've overcome distractions and developed discipline, that would help. Changing my diet, deleting social media has helped tremendously. My burning passion is music, and I would desire to do that commercially. Maybe videos on how to formulate a plan for your desired path in the best places to find resources on that.
Also a big question, but I'll give a couple thoughts on it at least. In terms of figuring out what to do if you're considering a self-taught route, I mean, if you go to school, the path is pretty clear. You figure out what major is the most relevant, you figure out what school you want to go to, and then you do what they tell you to do. And if you do it good enough, you get a diploma at the end. Then you try to get a job. If you want to be self-taught, you don't have that. And I think the way you want to think about being self-taught is that you should figure out what your end goal is first. Like, what do you need to achieve whatever it is you want? If it's getting a job somewhere, then usually that means portfolio, work that's good that you can show people and say, hey, look, I did this. I did a good job. You should hire me, because you won't have a diploma. So that's kind of the parallel there.
I think that if you're going the self-taught route, you need an exact position in mind to go after, to build a portfolio for.
Right. I mean, for me, I built a portfolio for freelance iOS software developer. That was my thing. I said, I build iOS apps. Here's some that I've made. Here's why they're great. You can go look at them here and whatever. And here's the technology I use. And I take that portfolio and would show it to people and say, look, this is what I do. And then they go, oh, that's really good. And they would hire me.
Actually, when I first started learning art and everything, if people asked me what I wanted to be or what I was doing, I would say, well, I like to draw, and, I like to paint, and I like these artists, and, someday it'd be cool if I was like, kind of like a painter, but like, drawing. And, you couldn't define it.
Yeah.
And I heard somewhere, put it into 2 words or one word and say that every single time. And so when people started asking, I would say, I want to be a concept artist and an illustrator.
Right.
And I still just say that. And that kept me focused on what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying is that
exactly
you find the thing you need to achieve, and then you work backwards from there and say, okay, what do I have to learn? What do I have to do to be able to make those things that I need? So that's your path for being self-taught. And you need to do a little bit of self-reflection about whether or not you think you can do that. I don't think that everybody will thrive in the self-taught environment. I mean, if you really need to be around people, you like the school environment, or that's very motivating for you, having somebody else force deadlines upon you, that actually is pretty powerful. You don't quite get that yourself. Those are important things. So we may talk more about this in the future, but that's kind of the short version of it.
Yeah.
And well, one more thing. If you're feeling a burning passion towards something, I mean,
that's a good sign.
Yeah, give it a shot if you can. I mean, if you can dedicate 2 years of your life to pursuing it, how much are you risking there? If you can get away with it, to take a shot at something and see if it really works for you, then I think it's worth it if you could make it happen. So I would encourage you to do that. You may not have a burning passion forever. Putting it off doesn't necessarily put you in any better position later on.
Yeah, it's a tough choice. And if you're not sure and you're still deciding, make sure you do your research. It's not always a choice between self-learning and college. There's a whole bunch of different colleges, and I looked at colleges because I actually wanted to go to college for art, but none of them were teaching the types of things I wanted to learn.
Right.
So it just stopped being an option for me.
There may be a school that's great. There may be a professor that's great, somebody you really want to study under, and it does fit exactly or pretty close to what you want. Or like in your case, it doesn't quite fit and you're really just better off teaching yourself. So yeah.
Oh, he also asks if there's anything we can do to address distractions and discipline. And our next episode is on procrastination.
Yeah,
and
which
it definitely addresses some of these things.
actually our next 2 episodes are on procrastination because we talked about it for over 2 hours and we decided that we needed to break it into two. But yeah, we go pretty in depth on the emotional relationship you have with something you need to do and why certain things become so difficult for certain types of people like us who have issues with perfectionism and obsession, and all that stuff kind of fits together. So that's, I think, where we really talk about that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. One comment. Dustin Park says, "Great job. Love the logo. I am guessing that is Dan's creation. This is an awesome format. Looking forward to more." It's not my creation, actually. I had my friend do all the graphic design. I really love her stuff, and I was excited to have her be a part of this. But no, it's not my art. Okay, let's go to the next video.
Okay.
Why social media is your biggest problem. Actually, I really like this from another one from Emily Thomas. "I used to struggle with the social media time suck, but I haven't lately. I still have all my accounts, but I've turned off most notifications. The only notifications I keep are for content that brings me at least an 8 to 10 dopamine hit. So when I woke up this morning to a notification on Michael's old channel, he posted a video on his old music theory YouTube channel. I was hit with probably an 11 out of 10 dopamine excitement level. That was instantly gratified by watching the video and then watching the intro to this channel and this video. Instant 10 out of 10 gratification for 2 hours. And I feel really good about this content. So I've conditioned myself to expect at least an 8 out of 10 instant gratification dopamine hit for at least 10 minutes by only allowing YouTube notifications for content I absolutely love. Any 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10 dopamine hit from just browsing social media just doesn't do it for me anymore. If I'm not feeling an instant 8 out of 10, I'm too bored. So I almost never go on my other social media platforms. And when I do, it's only for a few minutes because the dopamine hit isn't high enough. Michael, I'm so excited you're back on YouTube." Whatever. Everybody loves Michael.
Well, somebody does. No, thank you a lot, Emily.
But I really like this because
I do too.
The same thing. Yeah.
I can't believe we talked for however long it was about social media without talking about notifications, because that's such a big part of it.
Did we not?
I don't think so.
Oh, well.
I mean, the notifications are a way that stuff invades your normal life and your day. You're not even choosing to go browse Instagram. It's coming to you.
Right, they come out and grab you.
Yeah. No, I like this way of thinking about it. Just the fact that just thinking about it, period, is already pretty solid. Just thinking of, oh, I've notified of something on YouTube. Is it worth my time or not? Just that alone, that little bit of mindfulness about it is already pretty powerful as a way of deciding, okay, I'm not actually interested in this thing. It's just a time waste. It's just me trying to avoid some other thing that I'm doing, or just refusing to be bored and instinctually, sinking my time into this. So I like that way of thinking about it a lot. Even rating it. That's just a cool way to think about it.
I like that too. You just start weeding out the things that don't really matter to you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. This next one we have to read. And this is from Wesley Rayleigh. This is, you talk about going without the internet for a while.
Yeah. This is the guy who did it with me.
Yeah. How long did you go without the internet?
I don't remember. It felt like an eternity. It was probably a month or two, I want to say.
Yeah.
Probably around 2 months.
Anyway, Wesley Rayleigh says, "I started cracking up when you were talking about the months of no internet. I will always have fond memories of some of those ill-advised lifestyle experiments. I do have one comment, though, related to where y'all were talking about attention span and sort of lamenting on how new technologies are changing the way we think. It reminded me of a book I read about Polynesia. There was a chapter on how people in cultures with no written language, but an oral tradition, have a seemingly superhuman ability to memorize and recite long stories and genealogies. but they struggle to understand abstractions. No one would suggest that written language is anything but a white ball, and he's referring to
The chalice of invention metaphor, where you pull out a ball and sometimes it's white and it's purely good, and sometimes it's gray and it's good and bad.
Okay, except for maybe in a YouTube comment. But there is a sacrifice to be made, and humans will never go back to the type of cognition that they had prior to written language. The human brain is an incredibly adaptive organ, and it has a wide repertoire of behaviors according to the circumstances. I would caution to make value judgments around whether the ability to churn through Lord of the Rings is a good or a bad thing. Our generation's children will not think like us, and I hope we are able to celebrate the way they do think and explore what they are capable of without looking down on them because their brains have adapted to a different world than ours did. But yes, social media is the devil.
Right. So that's a fantastic observation. I've read similar things. I remember reading a book that I really like and recommend to people called Moonwalking with Einstein, and it's a book about memory. It's a very easy read. Highly recommend it. But one of the things he talks about is how pre-printing press, back when books were hand copied by people, and painstakingly line by line with a quill pen and an inkwell, and expensive paper, expensive binding. Books were rare and really valuable, and if you got to read one, that was a pretty big deal for you. So the way people would read them is that they would essentially memorize the book as they were reading it. And I don't know exactly how that worked, or if they read differently than we did and took a lot longer and internalized it more. Whatever the case, they could, like you said, recite long passages out of these books that they've read. Whereas for me, I can read a book sometimes and I'll get 3 chapters in and go, oh my God, I already read this. It just doesn't, I barely have a memory of the book in its entirety, or the fact that I even read it. So it's a excellent observation, and he's right that part of what is happening is a complete shift into a new way of thinking and a new way of consuming information. And we may just have to do a whole nother conversation about this, because it's a very fascinating thing to think about. But I think one of the main things he was saying is that we shouldn't look down on people because they think differently than we do. Yes, the next generation may not be able to sit down and read Lord of the Rings like we were as kids, but that's okay. People were really worked up about the printing press, thinking that the wide availability of books would mean that people just spend all their time in a fantasy world and they don't focus on the real world. And books were fine. We ended up just fine after books came out. So it's worth separating, I think, is what he's saying. Like the distraction of social media, it's changed the way we think, or not even just social media, but content aggregators, the whole internet, the amount of information we have. But we shouldn't look down on a shift in thinking. It's happening. It's happened before.
But in this episode, we're both kind of frustrated with social media in general. And the reason is that we both have our own goals that we're trying to accomplish, which includes us focusing for really long periods of time, like churning through Lord of the Rings. And so social media, for me, not everyone, but for me, it gets in the way a lot of the time. It gets in the way of my goals. Right. And that becomes an issue. And so I become really frustrated with it because it's everywhere. I can't control it too much because it's part of my job. It's part of my everyday life. Just to exist in this social environment, I have to deal with it. And so I get frustrated with it because it gets in the way of my goals. Right. It's not a problem for everyone.
Right. I mean, I think the way we're thinking is shifting, but there are entities out there that are, I'm going to say, weaponizing it almost, or like using it to fulfill their purposes. And some of it's intentional, some of it's just kind of incidental. It just happens to be really distracting and really addictive. So that's just something we have to contend with on some level. And I think being able to choose, or being able to focus, being able to choose to isolate yourself from these things, like those are important things that I think you kind of just have to be able to do if you're going to be self-taught. So
all right, but I think we may end up doing a social media part 2 episode. But all right. Moving on. John Yang asks, are you planning to do it live?
We have been planning to do it live pretty much since the start. So couple things. Part of it's simple. We've been struggling with some tech issues, trying to make sure that the recording and everything is stable, that we're getting consistent audio quality, which we have not been getting. There's some technical stuff that we've been trying to work through. But the format of the show that we've wanted from the start should work for live content. We want it to be conversational. We want things to feel off the cuff. We're not scripting. We're not rehearsing. We're not even editing, other than just very basic, cut the start and the end type of thing. So I think once we can get to where we feel consistent, we're still figuring certain things out. Like, how much do we talk about the show beforehand? Do we share thoughts? Do we, mostly go our own separate ways and think about things, which is pretty much what we've settled on for a lot of stuff, at least. Just getting the format down of what actually works for us coming together and talking about something for an hour and having a good, information dense, hopefully, conversation. And we haven't quite figured it out yet. We've been experimenting.
There's definitely been a few that have crashed and burned.
Been a handful, at least, that we have just cast away into oblivion because they were pretty terrible. So basically, we want to do it live. We really love the idea of having something as more of a dialogue between not just us, but people listening and everything. But we need to get a little bit more consistent with the format and feel comfortable that it mostly works. And then I think live would make sense. But we're working on it, but we're not quite there yet.
But I would say definitely sometime in the future.
Yes, sometime in the future, for sure.
Yeah. It's a goal.
Between now and the end of time, we will go live.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Next video, Obsession as a Theory of Genius, by Brent Rosenquist. I'm not sure if this resonates with others, but I find that I can become obsessed with random projects, not necessarily because of the content of the project, but more so because of the process of learning and discover, coupled with the application of those lessons that happen with a new subject. The new information and potential is energizing, and I can invest days without even realizing it. The downside for me is that once I have saturated to a certain level, I lose steam and as a result have difficulty with finishing. Although what it means to finish something seems like it could be a full episode by itself.
Yeah,
you just described Michael.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
That's hurtful.
But is that hurtful?
Well, it's true, whether it's hurtful or not. Yeah, I certainly suffer from that extensively.
Well, I mean, I do too. I do the same thing. I kind of chase new things, but
yeah, the obsession wave, that feeling of you getting more and more interested or even fixated on something where you're just putting it's like the only thing your mind can think about, that does not correspond neatly to the beginning and end of a project. It does what it does, and most of the time those feelings of interest and obsession tend to taper off before you've finished it. Like he said, finishing is a pretty loose concept that you could debate, but sometimes it's not. I mean, there's been a lot of projects where I had a mechanical keyboard that I was working on. It's a 3D printed mechanical keyboard. Actually, our brother Steven was working on this with me. And I had 3D printed or designed the key profile of everything. Yeah, remember this? And this was a lot of work. I mean, it doesn't maybe sound like it, but I had designed keycaps, measured them, figured out the exact curves and profiles, printed out all of them, 88, well, that's a physical keyboard or a music keyboard. However many keys there are on a 10 keyless keyboard, I printed out all of them, built the frame, everything, and then the obsession was gone, and that was that, and the keyboard does not work. So in that case, you could define a pretty clear endpoint in that it was supposed to work and it doesn't, but it's close. The thought of soldering all the key switches together is what got me a little bit less excited. So,
well, this whole pattern of behavior that he's talking about, I think is really interesting, and I've seen it before. And you, Stephen, and our cousin Ryan,
yeah,
I think it comes up pretty often. I mean, I do this to an extent, but not quite as much. I don't think I relate quite the same way. But
I
anyway,
don't think it's as bad for you from what I've seen anyway.
it looks like there's a couple different personalities in the way that we learn things. So I feel like this idea might be part of something bigger that we could talk about in the future.
Yeah.
But yes, people do relate to what you're saying. It's not just you.
Yeah, I don't exactly know why it happens, but I can say it's a fantastic riddle that's worth figuring out, which hopefully we can do at some point.
Yeah, future topic for sure. All right. God, there's so many good comments. But all right, I'll just go with this one by Caleb Dang. Thank you too for these talks. I can really relate to this perfectionistic, obsessive attitude. I've always called it my OCD. Hearing about it from someone else makes my tendencies and where they come from a lot clearer to me. I've recently made strides in channeling this behavior into productivity through rules and time micromanagement that I impose on myself with relative success. The problem is that when I am in that obsessed state, anything or anyone who removes me from it or acts outside the plan makes me shut down. I often wonder if this is why the geniuses you mention are often lonely or isolated. It would be interesting to hear if you two have experienced a negative side to the obsession as well.
Haha. Well, you talk about that a lot in this upcoming episode on procrastination, right? How you have your plan for all these amazing things you're going to accomplish on the weekend, and then something interrupts it, even if it's not for that long, and you're just ready to rage quit, and it's all ruined.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Have I experienced a negative side to the obsession?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Because one part of you is so involved with this obsession. For me, how well I do in this pursuit of artistic abilities is so closely tied to my identity. If I start failing at that, I'm a failure in my life, okay? But that's just one part of my life, is that obsession. And then there's so many other parts. I'm married, I have dogs and, family things to go to and friends and, all sorts of things. So you're trying to balance them, but that obsession can get very strong at times, and it can be very hard to come away from it. I remember one time I was really into, and still am really, painting things on location. So I go to pick my wife up from work, and I get there purposefully about an hour and a half early, and I start painting in the car, and I'm painting the scene in front of me, and it's going really, really well for like the first time in a long time or ever. It's going really well. And then she gets out of work and she wants to go home. And I was not done. And I wasn't angry at her, but angry at the situation. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I've ever been so angry in my life. That being pulled away from doing really well at this thing.
I've seen you pretty angry, so you must have been real mad.
I was not angry at her. I was just angry at the fact that I had to leave this thing. That made me so upset because I felt like such a failure, but it wasn't my fault. And it wasn't her fault either. It was just circumstance. Like, why couldn't I finish earlier? Whatever. Anyway, I went back the next day and finished it, and all was fine. But yes, the obsession can be so strong to where other things in your life can suffer. Yes, I have experienced negative side effects to this as well. And no, I don't know the answer. I don't know. What about you?
Well, okay. So yes from you. I don't want to defer everything to the future, but we did talk about this a lot in the perfectionism episode that's coming out next week. And
Procrastination.
sorry, I keep mixing them up because they're very related. That's the secret.
Yeah.
Part of it is I think the future fantasy thing where you have this idea in your head of this idealized future. This weekend I'm going to accomplish all these things and it's going to be amazing, and it's kind of this future you fantasy thing, and then if it gets interrupted at all, it's like the whole fantasy collapses of, oh, I'm not going to accomplish all these million things that I said I was going to do, and I'm not going to have 20 hours to spend on this project. It's only going to be 15. And there's something so crushing about that. And if you can, one, recognize that you're upset that your fantasy got interrupted, and then two, if you can plan a little better where you acknowledge that these things do happen and you shouldn't have a plan that relies on everything always going perfectly, then you can create this idea for the time you're going to spend, whether it's at the park sketching or the weekend project, whatever, where you acknowledge that some things happen and you can be a little bit more mindful of not letting your whole fantasy collapse on the slightest little interruption.
Yes. Yeah, learn to adapt to changing things. But this is a very good question, and I have wondered this myself. How do you balance everything, or should you balance everything? It's a big question.
Yeah,
and
obsession to me is almost a drug. It's this superhuman, mind in overdrive state, or at least it can be. And
no, obsession wants to be the only thing.
Yeah.
But being a human, obsession cannot satisfy everything, and so it
also just doesn't acknowledge that there are other things happening. I mean, you can't be in that state all the time.
Right. Sometimes you have to stop and go eat or
use the bathroom, whatever, sleep. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's not sustainable. Yeah, learning to moderate your obsession is something that I won't say I've figured out, but it is important. I think just 100% leaning into it all the time and thinking, oh, I'm super focused, I'm just going to ride this wave and I'm going to stay up till 5 a.m. working on this stuff, and I don't need to eat, I don't need to sleep. That doesn't last, and there are side effects. There is an obsession hangover where you can't do anything in the time after, and it makes it so that it's hard to start something. It can cause procrastination because the idea of you doing something, knowing that it can lead to this life interrupting, crazy mental state, that can build a resistance to you ever wanting to start something in the first place because it's such a huge deal.
Right. Okay, moving on from that. I could keep going. Yeah. I could definitely keep going on that, but yeah. All right, moving on. Next video, and this is perfectionism video. Alexander Levshin says, please tell in one of your future videos more about your journey in music, not about YouTube stuff, but about creating music. Did you have any plans to become an artist? I mean, making money creating music, or did you write music just for yourself? What was the progress in music making? Did you release songs, EPs, albums? And if yes, how successful they were? Is it still a hobby, or you abandoned music creation completely? And I think this is directed towards you.
I think it's directed towards both of us.
All right.
Or at least I don't want to be the only one to answer.
Okay, I'll answer too. You go first.
Okay. Yeah, without getting too much into it, I mean, I had never planned on being a musician. I might have entertained the idea, but it was never my plan. I honestly went to college for music because I wanted to go to college for music, or more specifically, switch to music from engineering. That literally was my plan, and I never knew what I wanted to do after. Being a performing musician, I did a little bit of that. I performed around some. I certainly performed a lot in school and did other, venues and small concerts and things through that. I did get pretty interested in writing music. I had, written a few things, performed them, around town a few times, stuff like that. Never really did any serious recording or tried to release
Is there anything
music that
still
way.
on Spotify that you wrote?
I don't know.
Are you sure? I want to look it up right now.
There might be the theme,
Yeah.
the Bird Jumper theme song.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, I made a game. It was like a really simple iOS game, part of my portfolio that I was working on. And I needed a theme song, so I composed something. Actually, that's on YouTube. I think there's me playing that on YouTube.
Okay, well, it is definitely still on Spotify. We wrote songs for our game Unicycle Boy, but that apparently is not on Spotify.
Yeah,
I don't know if it ever was, but yeah,
that's I think pretty much the extent of it. Well, at least for me, I wrote some music for certain things out of necessity, basically. But I never tried to release an album or even was at a level where that made sense to me. I liked composing a lot, and I think that I had some good ideas and a good, relatively good sense of what sounded good and what didn't. I knew what I wanted, and when I wrote something I really liked, I knew it. But I was never good enough to like really put together a solid piece of music that really flowed well and had that feeling of a mature piece. It was more loose ideas, and it was a little bit immature, I think.
No, I don't think you should say you weren't good enough to do it. Absolutely.
No. I don't mean I wasn't good enough, but I liked doing it. This is, like Ira Glass's thing where you know what sounds really good and you know where you're at and you know they don't quite match up. I was definitely in that state of knowing that what I was writing wasn't really what I wanted, and I think what it needed was just me to do it more. I think if I had written 1,000 pieces and they would have started maturing more and being more solid. That's how I felt about my own music.
I think this whole music question, I keep saying it, but I would love to do a whole episode on this because it's a big subject.
Yeah, no, we will. We'll
Both
talk
of
about
us pursued music.
Yeah, we'll talk about music later.
Yeah. All right. Another one by Emily Thomas. I wonder how much grading systems play into perfectionism. I got the impression that I was expected to retain 100% of the material. Otherwise, why test it? And anything less than that is failure. Looking back, I don't think that's what teachers actually expect. I hope teachers just want to see growth in the students. Actually, I'll just stop there. But people bringing up more about perfectionism, it kind of just makes me want to do another video on perfectionism.
All right. Well, we can't say that for everything, but
I know,
maybe.
But...
Well, it fits. She's right, and I wish that we had maybe brought this up in the perfectionism episode, but I do think that school contributes to that a lot because a school environment is artificial. It really doesn't parallel much in the real world. And it creates these moments of, okay, you have an assignment and it's going to get graded from 0 to 100, or a test is graded from 0 to 100, and 100 means you did it perfectly. But nothing is like that in the world. If you make a painting, there's no grade, there's no notion of, perfect. That's not even a relevant way of thinking about it. Really, for virtually anything you do, if I build some software, if I work on a project, if I write a song, anything, the notion of perfect doesn't apply. That perfectionism is me having some obsession in my head, wanting it to be good with no clear endpoint or way of even defining that. And I do think that the way you're forced to operate essentially in school, that can be a side effect of that, where you learn to do things according to a very specific standard that has this idea of, oh, you were perfect or you weren't quite good enough or whatever. And that, I don't know if that's the way it works.
I was listening to a podcast. I forget what it was. But they were talking about a lot of, those two psychiatrists talking. I forget the name of it. If I think of it later, I'll post it in the description, whatever. These two guys were talking about how most of their patients, two psychiatrists, were talking about how most of their patients that suffer from perfectionism are teachers.
Yeah.
because they've spent their whole lives in the academic system, and they've thrived there, and they've gotten straight A's, hundreds, everything. It's just all perfect, and then they get out of school and they become teachers, and all of a sudden they're not graded. Like,
Right.
their performance
Right.
is not graded anymore, and they don't know how to feel that sense of achievement. And so it's almost like this whole system that they've been going off of suddenly does not apply, because it's not a good simulation of how real life works.
Right. It's almost as if you switch to grading yourself and you have to decide if you got 100% or 85 or whatever.
Right.
But there's no metric, there's no upper end on that. It's just up to your own obsessive, overanalyzing, crazy brain to decide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
So that's a good question. Also, maybe we'll talk more about that when we talk about education stuff.
Yeah.
In another video.
Yeah.
But all right, that's pretty much it.
Cool.
I mean, there's a ton of really good comments. I just
Yeah,
can't
and
read
that was
all
just
of them,
a quick sample.
Yeah.
I think what we want to establish is that the responses that we've gotten have been amazing, and it's forced us to think about things that we hadn't before, or even just, I don't know, just really good observations and ideas. Clearly, there's a lot of people who have similar experiences in their own, they're wrestling with it on their own. So it's pretty cool to read.
I mean, people are making book suggestions and
yeah.
a lot of cool stuff. So if you haven't, you could read through there, and maybe someone has the answer for you.
So if anyone wants to leave us any more feedback, you are welcome to, anywhere you like. We read everything for sure. Also, if you're an audio only listener, you can just email us at theoveranalyzerspodcast@gmail.com. We will read that. If you have ideas for future topics, anything you want, we're really, really excited to hear what everybody has to say. The level of feedback has been extremely high, which is really cool.
Yeah, but I mean, we're still in the experimental stage, so all of that feedback really matters a lot right now. So what do you want to hear? What do you not want to hear? We want to know all of that.
We'd love to hear feedback just on the show itself. What do you think works, what doesn't? Like you said, we are experimenting and trying to figure out how to make a good show. We have not had any experience with this format before, so it's something we're trying to sort out.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for contributing some awesome stuff. We will see you next week with the monster episode on procrastination.
Part 1.